Welcome to Lifestyle Solopreneur, the community for entrepreneurs who put lifestyle first. Join your host, Flavia Barris, as she interviews successful lifestyle solopreneurs and shares ideas to help you find the perfect balance between lifestyle, business, and self. Flavia is an attorney, marketing expert, and founder of several online academies. She's been featured in major media, including BBC World News, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Post, ESPN Television, and more. Join us for this episode of Lifestyle Solopreneur. Hey, Lifestyle Solopreneurs. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Samantha Goodman. She's an attorney in Los Angeles, California. She concentrates her practice in real estate leasing in the commercial, office, industrial, and retail areas, representing both the landlord side as well as the tenant side. She also represents clients in the acquisition and sale of real property. She's worked both regionally and nationwide with clients such as Merrill Lynch, Toyota, Novation Companies, Activision, Isuzu Motors, The Gap, Ticketmaster, Kia Motors America, First American Title, Hyundai Capital America, and Wells Fargo Advisors. Great roster of clients there. She's also represented financial institutions including Wells Fargo Bank, Bank of America, City National Bank, and Bank of the West. She has represented major institutional landlords such as Tishman Speyer, Fifth Street Properties, Trizic Properties, and CB Richard Ellis, which are all household names if you're in the real estate industry. She spent 12 years practicing in very large law firms before starting her own firm. She began her career at Pillsbury Madison and Sutro LLP, which is now Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman LLP, where she was a senior associate. She was also a senior associate at DLA Piper, US LLP, before joining Bryan Cave LLP as counsel. She's certified by the Green Building Certification Institute as a Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design accredited professional. The shorthand for that would be LEED AP. And as a LEED AP, she's part of a select group of attorneys who are recognized as having an understanding of green, environmentally conscious building strategies. I am so excited to welcome Sam to the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And, I apologize. I have a little cold for any listeners who are like, our host is sounding a little stuffy. I have a toddler. We were on a family vacation in Seattle, and I look over on the airplane. This is the first flight where my toddler has her own seat, so she's a big girl, right? Because she used to be a lap baby. I look over at my big girl, and she's leaning over, licking the armrest. I'm not kidding you.
Ew.
I was like, really? We're starting the trip this way? And I should have known. Of course, the whole family came down with probably the bubonic plague, but I think it may just be a cold. But, I wouldn't cancel this interview for anything. I don't think the flu itself or the bubonic plague could have kept me away because we've been trying to connect. We're both attorneys. I mean, I don't usually interview or focus on attorneys. We're both fellow attorneys. We both happen to do real estate law. We both worked for the same law firm at one point, but at different times, I believe. And I know your mom. She's a law professor at the same school where I'm an adjunct law professor. And guess what? I'm also a LEED AP. We just have so much in common that I thought this is someone I want to put on the show because you're truly into lifestyle and balance, but our journeys maybe got to that same place in different ways, different paths. And I'm really excited to explore that with you.
Great.
So my question for you is, how would you describe your current career? What is it that you do now as a way that you make a living?
We mean, as a real estate attorney?
As a real estate attorney. So for a lot of listeners, they may have professional experience in either some executive field like accounting, maybe working for a firm. They may be graphic artists working for a design firm. And I know a lot of people are looking to make the same transition that you did, which is from working for a studio, a firm, a company, and going on your own, freelance, and opening your own business, essentially.
Right. Okay. So, I started law firms, straight out of law school and before I was married with kids. So, a big change now. So I now have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. So I have a 5th grader and an 8th grader. I went out on my own in 2009 when my oldest was going into first grade and my youngest was in preschool. Biggest difference was that when I was working for large law firms and when I first had kids, I had a full-time nanny. So I was at work all the time and building a lot of hours. And, I had very little time with my kids, much, much less than I have now. So, it was pretty typical. My nanny would show up at 7 a.m. and I would go to work. And I had, the only deal I made with myself when I had kids was that a very good friend of mine, who's actually still at DLA, she had a live-in nanny, when her kids were growing up. She's 10 years my senior. So I think that she is a very good friend and a role model to me. But I think what I realized with her was that she had a live-in nanny. And so for her, she didn't have to get home at a certain time. I mean, one, my husband and I are not really live-in nanny types anyway. And two, for me, I felt like at least if I had to be home at a certain time, that was time that I would always have with my kids every day. So I was home as much as I was working at a large law firm. I would get home by 5:30 every day and have that time, a few hours with my kids before they went to sleep. And then obviously I would get back on the computer and do whatever work I needed to do after my kids went to sleep, which is very different from what I do now. Because when I started working for myself, we no longer needed a full-time nanny. So I started very happily taking my kids to school every day and picking them up at school every day. So a lot of my work schedule is based around, now instead of just going to work every day and working from 8 to 5 every day, but it's centered around getting my kids off to school. And then obviously I work while my kids are in school. But the good part for me too is that my kids were old enough at the time I decided to start my own firm that they were relatively, I'll say relatively because I still had a preschooler, self-sufficient. They're now very self-sufficient. So, I pick them up and then I come home and do work. So, I think the hardest transition for me was being in a law firm where you're supposed to be available to your clients 24/7. If they want a conference call at 2, you have a conference call at 2. And that is, now there's a set time that I have to pick up my kids up at school or if I have to take them to activities. So I no longer, so I don't have that kind of flexibility for my clients that I used to, but most of them are very nice and understanding about it. And I think that the hardest transition was realizing that I didn't have to apologize for not being available all the time. Let's just say I don't take lunch hour from 12 to 1 like I used to. So now for me, it's just I can't have a meeting at 2 o'clock because at 2 o'clock I go and I pick up my kids every day. So.
And now that you have that flexibility in your life, would you ever go back?
No. I think the only drawback to working for myself is that I, for the most part, work at home. I do have an executive suite that I can go to if I need. And actually, the executive suite is one of my clients as well. The only thing, it's a bit of social purgatory. So I'm in my home office every day with my dog. And there's not a lot of, my social outlet, I guess, is, getting my kids to school. But, I'd say probably the only thing I miss about working in a firm.
Just a little bit of the water cooler chat.
Yes. The social aspect of actually working in a firm. But other than that, there's, I'm, I think finishing up my 7th year and I'm not looking back.
Your 7th year of your own private practice, your own, what we call, for the non-lawyers, we call them solos or sole practitioners. And that'd be an attorney that is their own complete law firm. So do you have any contract attorneys or associates that you use for the work, or do you only take on the work that you're going to handle yourself?
I only take on the work I can handle myself, which I think is partially because I'm a control freak and partially because I feel like my clients are hiring me. And I've also kept it where, the point of going out on my own was not to work the kind of hours I worked at a big firm. It was to have a serious amount of work-life balance. So to the extent, I take on too much work, then that kind of defeats the purpose. And like I said, I like to control things myself, and I know that if I do them, they'll get done the way they need to be done. So at this point, 7 years in, I haven't needed anybody contract. I have a lot of friends of mine that do other stuff. So I only take on what I know I can do. I don't take on, so I have a pretty specialized specialty. I do mostly commercial leasing, some purchase and sale, but mostly leasing. And, I do get, people think if you're a real estate attorney, that must mean you can do everything. I actually don't do everything. And to the extent I can't, I have plenty of referral sources so I'll refer the work out instead.
Yes, I found that even as a law student way back when, as soon as someone hears you're a law student, they want you to do everything. They're like, oh, great, you're a law student. I have this issue with this thing. Can you write a will so that my pet dog is taken care of if I were to pass away? And you look at the person like deer in the headlights, like, I have no idea if that's even something anyone could do, but I certainly can't.
Right.
Because, attorneys are very specialized, and a lot of business owners, they know they need an attorney and they sort of think they're going to hire one attorney to be the Jack or Jill of all trades for them. But you're usually better off hiring specialists for everything that you need done. So if there's a litigation issue that you're involved in, you should hire a litigator. If you are trying to do a real estate transaction, you hire a real estate agent. If you need your estate plan set up, you go to an estate planning attorney. And for a lot of business owners, when they get involved in business, that's one of the first lessons they learn. You should really probably never go with an attorney who tells you point blank, I can do anything you need.
I think you're totally right. Because the bottom line is that like I said, listen, I'm lucky enough to have a big enough client base where I don't need to. I mean, I think there's people out there that just are lawyers out there who need the work so badly that they'll try to figure out how to do anything and everything. That makes me very uncomfortable. So
right.
I'm very happy in my little world, but
yes.
where I know, well, first of all, I mean, but as you said, I mean, I'm a specialist for a reason, and people hire me for my specialty. And the good news is that it's a specialty that I have plenty of work in my specialty. And so I don't thankfully need to branch outside of it. So,
right. I get very nervous when an attorney is a mile wide and an inch deep. You really shouldn't be when it comes to the law, because there's just so much. And in a way, you're never that great until you've done it for a few years, no matter what you're doing. They say that it takes 10,000 hours to become truly an expert in something. And it probably takes 5,000 just to become really proficient at it.
Right.
So if someone's been doing something for 5 years full time, they've probably put in about 10,000 hours, and that's when they can do something really well. But, there is an exception, and I want to kind of throw that out there since we're chatting legal stuff and lawyer stuff. For a lot of business owners, what you can hire and incorporate into your team would be an outside general counsel, which is an attorney who joins your team and is your attorney, but that attorney ends up helping to outsource and manage the workload that comes in that's legally related to either maybe trademarks, maybe you've got some litigation, and they help be the liaison with outside attorneys who are specialists. So sometimes you can do that as a business owner, is just bring someone onto the team that will serve as that point person. And then that point person can go out and help you manage your relationships with all of your outside attorney specialists.
And I guess I would say too, which is that, doctors specialize and lawyers are no different. So you're not going to go to like I said, there is kind of general practice type physicians, but for most doctors are specialists. And if you have a certain issue, you're going to go to a specialist, and it's really no different for law.
Right. Yeah. And your general practitioner can refer you out to the specialist and can sort of act as triage and figure out where you need to go and who to send you to. And you're right. It's a perfect analogy, really, of how the law works as well. So what do you envision for the future in your business? Do you see yourself staying at the current model that you've created for yourself? I mean, it sounds like you're really balanced, really happy. You get to spend a ton of time with your kids, and you're not overworked at all, because that's one of the criteria for being on the show, is that someone's got to have that life balance. So, but for the future, and kids grow up and things change. I mean, where do you see your business going?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I still have one in elementary school and one only in middle school. So I still have a lot of years where I have kids in school. And as you know, and as you will learn as your kids get older, like they tend to need, as they get older, they don't need less time of your time. They need more of your time, and they just have more going on. So I don't envision any changes in my practice or my business until I have college age kids, at which point I may, let's this way. So my very good friend that I referred to earlier, who was still at one of my previous law firms. So at some point in time when she decides she is no longer wants or needs to be need is the wrong word, wants to be at a large law firm, she and I have talked about, going into practice with each other, because we have the same specialty and we've been friends for years, and we always covered each other when we did work together. So that's a potential, but until my kids are in college, I don't really see any desire to change what I'm doing.
And what would you advise to other freelancers? Let's say someone who starts their own either graphic design studio, a CPA that branches off from a firm and decides to start their own bookkeeping or accounting service. There's so many specialties out there where somebody can leave a firm, open up their own shop, do really well. A lot of the clients will actually follow the person over to their new one-man business or one-woman business.
That's how I am in business, exactly, because I took my clients with me. So exactly.
And what would you suggest that would be the first step? I mean, let's say you're talking to someone, you're at a coffee shop, and they said, you have your own law firm, you're doing really, really well. I have a practice. I'm a graphic artist. I work at a big advertising studio and I've put in my time and I've been there for 6, 7 years and I'm thinking of branching out on my own. Do you have any advice for me sitting here right now, stuck in a 9 to 9 job and I'm considering making this huge leap? And, what can you offer to that person?
I mean, a lot. I'm just trying to figure out how to.
Well, let's address, step by step. I mean, mindset wise, what do you think the biggest challenge is and how someone can get over that?
Okay. I mean, mindset wise, I think the weird is not the right word. Hard's not quite the right word either. I think and maybe I'll just use weird or hard. It was really interesting, which as I'm sure you know as well, when you work for a large law firm, even when you are a first year associate, you have instant credibility with people. So I remember being on the phone with people when I was a first year associate, when I was at Pillsbury, and people just assumed that if you worked at a large law firm, that meant that you knew exactly what you were doing. And as a first year lawyer, you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. So like I said, I always had instant credibility. The interesting thing about going out on my own was that I knew I was well trained and I knew that my former boss and mentor was, and he still is, one of the most well-known lawyers in leasing, but people don't know that. And so a lot of people tend to assume that when you are a solo, that I don't know. I feel like there's a stigma attached to being a solo practitioner or in your own business, which means, as opposed to being in a large law firm where, like I said, you have instant credibility. So a lot of lawyers were kind of disrespectful. Or I remember when I was doing one of my first deals when I went on my own and the attorney on the other side said, "Oh, well, that was a really good set of comments." And I was thinking to myself, I don't need you to tell me I know how to do my job because I know I know how to do my job. And then at some point during the conversation, we ended up having a conversation about where I'd come from and where I had practiced. And it was kind of like, at that point, then he decided to give me the respect that I feel like I already deserve. I shouldn't have to have like a big law firm under my name in order to deserve respect. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges. And by the way, I'm not big into ego and I didn't work at large law firms. So I could say I worked at a large law firm. It's just kind of like, I have a mom who's a law professor and, if you do well in school, it was my path, which is that I grew up in a house with a mom who was a lawyer and a law professor. And you went to law school, you did well, you go work for a big firm. It's just kind of what you did. I didn't do it for ego reasons. I just did it because that's kind of what quote, a lot of people think you're supposed to do. And I had a really good experience and I had a great mentor and boss, and it was a very good experience for me. But I think there's a certain amount of leaving your ego at the door if you're going to go out on your own. And like I said, where people might not give you the amount of respect you deserve at the outset anyway. So that was definitely it was just interesting because I am very confident that I know what I'm doing. And my clients are confident that I know what I'm doing. And it was just interesting to watch people, opposing counsel's reaction to me when I no longer had a big firm name attached to me. So
that's great advice, is just to prepare people for that shift, because you no longer are piggybacking on the credibility of your employer. You now have to create and be confident in your own abilities, and you have your own brand. You essentially create a brand. Is there any brand creation advice that you have for solopreneurs who are looking to strike out on their own?
I think for me, you touched on a little bit, which is that, how do you go about starting your own business? I mean, so for me, I took my existing clients with me, and I was lucky enough that some of those, like my biggest big name client that I took with me at the time was Toyota. I do all the leasing work for Toyota Financial. So, I mean, I think in certain respects, you need, having an existing client base is helpful, because in order to market yourself to other people, you have to show those other people that you have other clients that have confidence in you. So I don't know. I know that there's certain people that come out of law school and go straight into being a solo practitioner because they either couldn't find a job or for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure how they get a reputation or obtain credibility or whatever. So for someone striking on your own, you have to make sure you obviously have a client base. And like I said, I feel like that your existing client base, what you start with, is actually what's going to give you credibility to move forward with your business.
And would you describe that moment where you were having these conversations with opposing counsel, or where clients were asking you, "Oh, it's just you're just on your own"? Would you categorize that as your most terrifying moment in business? Or is there something else that was even more shocking or terrifying or challenging or scary?
So, I mean, it was my choice to go out on my own, but a bit of a push, we'll say. So the scariest moment for me, Merrill Lynch for the first 12 years of my practice was my largest client. And I represented Merrill Lynch, and we did all of their leasing work. Let's say at my first 2 law firms, we had all of the West Coast leasing work. And then at Bryan Cave, we had all their leasing work. The reason for me going out on my own was that when Merrill Lynch imploded in 2009 or 2008, actually, and got, taken over by Bank of America. Bank of America took all the work for the most part in-house, and that 50% of my workload disappeared. And at that point, I was part-time at Bryan Cave. And when I say part-time, it was barely part-time. It was like 85%. So as I always refer to it as take the edge off part-time, but certainly not. I call it take that because it certainly was not work-life balance part-time or spend time, a lot of time with my kids part-time. Like I said, it was the take the edge off. Or the funniest thing is that when I first went part-time, someone gave me a cartoon about working part-time. And so the person said, you went part-time? And the person referred to, yeah, now I get part-time pay for full-time work.
Right.
Which was the joke. So anyway, so when Merrill Lynch imploded and I was also part-time and it was 2009 and law firms were laying people off left and right, I was a very easy target to be laid off. So me, like many other lawyers, got laid off in September of 2009. So my choice at the time was I could either go back and, because let's just say there was law firm jobs in 2009 when all the layoffs were happening were very hard to come by. At the same time, like I said, I'm lucky in that my mentor and former boss is really, really well thought of. So it allows, I think I probably, if I had wanted to, could have gotten a job at another, large firm. But it was at that point in time, once I got laid off, the decision was, do I go back and work full time, which means I will never get to see my kids? Or do I try striking out on my own? Because I did still, even though Merrill Lynch was my biggest client, I still had other clients and they were willing to come with me. So in terms of the scary moment was, oh my God, I've worked so hard my whole life to go to college and go to law school and to work at large law firms. And like many really great, capable lawyers, I got laid off, like a lot of people.
Right.
So, but I definitely had, when it first happened, I was so terrified. And I remember coming home and looking at my kids thinking, my husband and I started contingency plans for what happens if we lose our house. And I started trying to figure out how I was going to give my car back and get a cheaper car. All that sort of stuff.
Thinking like a lawyer, just analyzing. You probably had flow charts.
Yeah, but that's it. That for me was that was a scary moment. And my husband was at the time super supportive. And he and I decided together that why not take my existing clients and why not, strike out on my own and see if it could work. And but honestly, it was a blessing in disguise. And honestly, the best, it's funny to say that getting laid off was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because like I said, I think a lot of people work in firms and for companies because they're risk adverse and because you want a paycheck, and I am no different. And so, but for the fact I kind of got pushed, but for getting laid off, I'm not sure I ever would have made the decision, even though I did want to spend more time with my kids to go out on my own. But like I said, it was honestly the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And I can't imagine my life any different. I can't imagine still working at a big firm anymore. So that was the scary moment. But I had existing clients that were willing to believe in me. And let's just wait. Toyota, the general counsel of Toyota Financials commented to me at the time. I called her and said, okay, so I'm thinking of starting my own firm and doing it myself. And she said, her comment was, we didn't hire your law firm, we hired you. And so I think that's the position that people need to be in if they're going to, I'm not sure how you start a business without a client or some clients. And like I said, for the 17 plus years I've been practicing, I have lots of clients that are, not only my clients, but good friends of mine. And I think that's important to have those kind of relationships with people in order to be successful in business.
You're reminding me of that movie. It's called Jerry Maguire. And the title character is played by Tom Cruise. And there's one scene where he gets laid off, but not quite. And the layoff you're talking about, I remember it very well. I was a real estate attorney at the time too. And they were sort of mass layoffs, indiscriminate. No one was really being picked individually. It was just kind of like, okay, you're in real estate. All that work's dried up. Bye-bye, everybody.
Right.
But in Jerry Maguire, he gets fired, really. It's not a layoff. And he's just standing there with like a goldfish in one hand and a Ziploc baggie. And he's like, who's coming with me?
Coming with me.
Who's coming with me? But for a lot of people leaving a firm, whatever it is, design studio, wherever your job is, if it's the kind of job where clients could follow you and might follow you, that is a great way to start off with a client roster that is pre-existing. Because for a lot of other people, they don't have that advantage and they're going to have to really start from scratch. And I've had other guests on who have been in that position, and they talk about ways to generate clients from nothing, which is a lot more challenging, but is like a completely different story. There's so many ways to start a business. I love your story. I like that you said someone had to kind of push you off the edge of the pool, because the layoff hadn't happened. You might still be there now. And earlier I asked you if you would ever go back given the chance. And you were like, no way in heck, there's no way. So it's a really good thing that you were pushed off the edge of the pool because it turned out the water was warm, right?
Yeah, very. Like I said, greatest. And that's funny too, because I remember going back to because obviously I still have friends of my old law firm. And I remember going to lunch when, after the first couple of months, people look at me and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm great, thanks."
Right. You're like, "I'm okay. Are you okay?"
Exactly. I'm like, yeah, because I no longer have a billable requirement and a bunch of like meetings I have to go to and all the admin and I mean, that's the thing, which is, as but a lot of other people don't know. I mean, I think it was pretty universal when you work at a, large company, which is that there's the time you spend doing your work. And then there's the time you spend doing all the administrative stuff that goes along with it and all the meetings and everything else, which for a lawyer falls out of your billable hour requirement. So I don't have any of that sort of stuff.
You didn't
anymore.
love the mandatory sexual harassment 2-hour per year training you had to sit through as an employee in California.
Exactly. And the, weekly associate meetings and the real estate meetings and the business group meetings, any other number of places I spent my time, which by the way, I never really thought much of until I had kids. And then when you have kids, you start thinking things differently. And I just remember that when I had my first kid, I remember that I had a pretty decent commute. And I just remember thinking that the time in the car is time away from my kid. And so the same sort of thing, like time in a meeting is time that I'm not getting my work done, which means that's time away from my kid. So the nice part now working for myself is I don't have to think about that anymore.
Right. Or probably a lot more rarely. I'm a solopreneur as well. And now that I'm a parent, I did have to make that shift. So now the key question when I get an opportunity is that worth time away from my daughter? So,
right.
Last year I was asked to go be a keynote speaker in Atlanta, which would have required an airplane flight all day. And then I stayed at the hotel. And so it was a whole weekend away and I couldn't take her with me. And I remember thinking, okay, is it worth 3 days away from my daughter to do this thing? Where I think earlier before being a parent, I would have been like, boondoggle, Atlanta, so fun. I love speaking. It's a great audience. Like, the event was really fun. Of course I'll go. But then that changed and that's fine. I think everyone in life, life is not a stationary thing and it's not a constant, and we change and our lives change and our needs change. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you because they either have a real estate matter that they would love to see if you could work on it for them, or if they want to refer you to somebody else that they know that has a real estate matter, how do they get in touch with you?
Email is always the easiest, which is ssglaw@me.com. Or, my phone number is 310-295-9390. Actually, one of the really nice things that Toyota Financial did for me, which two of my clients requested that I get certified as a woman-owned business. And so there's a couple of companies, they're organizations that certify women as women-owned businesses. And it's important to a couple of my clients to show that they are doling out their work to minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. And so actually Toyota Financial was nice enough to hire a consultant so I could get certified as a woman-owned business. Because by the way, it is a pretty crazy process. My joke is that, they need so much documentation and information. I said they needed everything but my firstborn.
Do they ask for DNA proof?
Just about. Honestly, the amount of paperwork I had to provide, and then they also come out and interview you as well. much easier for me as a solo practitioner than it is for like a large woman-owned business. But like I said, it was important for Toyota Financial that I be certified. And so in, I think, April, I finally got certified. It's through the Women's Business Enterprise National Council as a woman-owned business. But as part of that, I had to create a website for myself because that was one of the requirements. You had to have a website. So I also have a website if people want to, which has my bio on it and also has my contact information. And the website address is ssgesq.wixsite, wixsite.com/sgoodman. So by the way, that's another thing for people too, which is that there's lots of places that you can make free websites out there. For my first 6 years in practice, I had no website because I didn't really need one. And so people needed I have a bio, which is what you have, and I would just email it to people. But they're great. So Wix.com is a great place to make a free website. They make it really, really simple and easy. I'm good in terms of word processing on the computer. I'm certainly not a graphic design guru, but there's lots of places online. If you obviously starting your own business, a lot of people, it's very important to have your own website, and there's great resources out there for people. So
thank you. That's one more great resource that you shared, Wix.com, Wix.com.
Correct.
You can go there and create a website. I've seen several of their websites. A lot of my colleagues, friends, people that I know have built their sites on Wix, and they really recommend it. It's very user-friendly.
Very. Because like I said, I certainly am the farthest thing from being a graphic artist or a web designer or anything else. And I think it's a nice website.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for being on the show today, because we have parallel paths in so many ways. We work in the same fields. We work for some of the same firms. We're both lead APs. I just thought that was such a unique thing because there aren't many attorneys who've sat through that exam for environmental and, green building issues. And I think you're great. So thank you for sharing resources, for opening up about your own journey, your own challenges, your own solutions, and your tips. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners do too. And I hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, and if you leave a review on iTunes, I promise I will read every single review. If you know someone who makes a full-time living from part-time work, and maybe this is you, please visit lifestylesolopreneur.com to nominate a guest or to nominate yourself. Because remember this, money doesn't buy happiness. But money in the hands of a happy person, there is no greater tool.
Today's episode was brought to you by the Get Shift Done program. It's a lifestyle-changing online class to help you define your business and lifestyle ambitions, and to set goals in a way you've never experienced before. This class will 10x your daily productivity with methods that will blow your mind. And if you use the coupon code podcast, the class tuition is 99% off. Visit GetShiftDone.com to enroll today.